It was a cold, moonless night when a group of friends decided to explore a place mentioned only in whispers, the old cemetery on the hill. This place was more than just an old resting ground. It was haunted by stories of tragedies and inexplicable disappearances. A thick mist hung in the air, enveloping the moss-covered tombstones and twisted trees that seemed more like shadows than plants. The wind blew, whispering ancient secrets and creating a macabre symphony with the dry leaves dragging along the ground. The friends, nervous but curious, passed through the rusty iron gate that creaked in protest. The moon, finally emerging from the clouds, cast a silvery glow over the dark shapes ahead. Each step they took seemed to echo, as if something invisible was following them. They decided to stop at the foot of an old angelic statue that, ironically, looked more diabolical under the flickering light. Each of them felt a chill down their spine and an invisible weight in the air, as if they were being watched. One of the friends, trying to dispel the fear, said, "It's not as scary as they say." Little did he know that these words would mark the beginning of a night they would never forget. Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the group, colder than death itself, bringing with it a putrid smell, as if something nearby was not at rest. They all looked around, trying to identify the source of the terrible odor, but found only darkness and distorted silhouettes. And then they saw it. A mysterious, dark figure stood in the distance, almost camouflaged among the tombstones. Its eyes, if they were eyes, glowed with a spectral light. Without any movement, just the presence of the figure made their hearts race and adrenaline flood their bodies. And even without it moving, they felt an inescapable urgency to leave that place. One of the friends, Tom S., with short breaths and wide eyes, pointed to the shadowy figure seemingly watching the group from afar. "Do you guys see that?" he asked, almost voiceless. Before they could answer, Ines, with a trembling hand, picked up something from the ground. It was an old letter, with yellowed paper almost disintegrating at the touch. She carefully opened it, and what was written there immediately chilled everyone's blood. "Come to the old crypt if you dare. Last entry by midnight." The words pulsed on the paper, as if written in fresh blood. The clock on one of their phones read exactly 11:55 p.m. They had only 5 minutes to decide. A sense of dread mixed with morbid curiosity overwhelmed them. Without really believing, C.L. Udia, the bravest of the group, took the first step towards the heart of the cemetery, where the crypt loomed like a sleeping monster. The others followed, hesitating, but unable to leave their only friend alone in the darkness. As they approached, the shadowy figure disappeared like smoke in the breeze. The path to the crypt was narrow and covered with vines that seemed like skeletal hands trying to grasp them. Each step echoed like a harbinger of something terrible. Finally, there it was, the crypt. It seemed to breathe, alive in a sinister way, with ancient and almost forgotten architecture. The door was open, gaping like a mouth ready to devour its prey. Inside, a deep darkness, interrupted only by a few candles that did not hesitate to light up as the group approached, casting dancing shadows on the cold stone walls. The air was thick, laden with the smell of decay and old secrets. "This must be a bad joke," murmured Rodrigo, but his voice sounded empty against the oppressive silence of the place. Then, without warning, one of the candles spilled hot wax on the floor, revealing a strange and disturbing symbol, drawn with ancient lines filled with hatred. The terror was palpable, sticky. They knew they were going too far, but they couldn't retreat. Something compelled them forward, a dark call they couldn't ignore. Little did they know that by crossing the threshold of that crypt, they were awakening forces that should remain asleep. Midnight was approaching, and with it, something far more sinister than their worst nightmares was about to be unleashed. With bated breath and wide-eyed terror, The friends hesitated only for a second before moving deeper into the crypt. The dark corridor stretched out before them like an infinite throat, swallowing the scant light from the candles. The stone walls seemed to shrink, narrowing the path and increasing the unbearable claustrophobia. Every step they took, the echoes reverberated, distorted and ghostly, until they sounded like distorted laughter coming from the depths. At the end of the corridor, a heavy, ancient-looking door awaited. Carvings of unknown creatures and scenes of torment were etched into its surface, as if the wood itself had trapped the screams of disturbed souls. For a moment, no one dared to touch the door, until Ciel Eudia, with inexplicable courage, pressed her hand against the macabre cold of the wood. As the door opened, a rush of stale, putrid air engulfed them. On the other side, a vast chamber was revealed. Stalactites hung from the ceiling like sharp teeth ready to descend, and the floor was decorated with more of those strange symbols, now more vivid and pulsating. In the center of the chamber, shrouded in a faint flickering light, were several hooded figures, motionless like statues. The sense of dread peaked when they realized those figures were surrounding a massive stone pedestal on which lay an ancient book with a worn leather cover. The atmosphere was thick with an ancient, tangible evil. Tom S. stepped forward, drawn by an invisible, irresistible force. "I think we need to see what's written in the book," he stammered, with a glazed look and death in his face. Ines hesitated, but knew something evil wanted them to continue. "This is wrong. We should leave," she whispered, almost voiceless. But it was too late. The hooded figures moved silently, forming a circle around them, eyes glowing beneath the shadows of their hoods. Ciel Eudia reached out, almost in a trance, and carefully opened the book, revealing yellowed pages covered in grotesque symbols and words that seemed to bleed. Suddenly, the ground shook. The symbols on the floor seemed to come to life, a crimson glow emanating from each line. The screams followed, coming from the hooded figures, not as human sound, but as the cries of condemned souls in eternal agony. The air grew thicker, and the sense that something terrible was about to be unleashed took hold of everyone. Rodrigo tried to scream, but his voice was drowned by the horror of the situation. The book began to turn its pages on its own, each page turning with an invisible force, and each turn echoing like thunder in the chamber. The crypt pulls to the rhythm of the pages, and a sinister presence, something much older and more malicious than they could comprehend, was awakening. Ciel Eudia's eyes turned completely white, and her voice, no longer hers, chanted forbidden words. Those who disturb the sleep of the ancient sealed must pay with lives and souls. In that instant, they all knew they had crossed beyond the point of no return. An invisible force seized Ciel Eudia, lifting her off the ground. Her friends watched helplessly as she floated in the air, her words continuing to echo with a sinister power. The hooded figures began to move again, now closing in on the friends, surrounding them with a tangible threat. Rodrigo, in a desperate act, tried to snatch the book from Ciel Eudia's hands, but an invisible barrier prevented him from getting close. Every attempt met with unbearable resistance, as if the very air had solidified around her. The pedestal began to glow with a macabre light, and the symbols on the floor shone intensely. The ground itself started to crack, revealing a black abyss below. The screams of tormented souls echoed from the depths, threatening to drag them into a fate worse than death. Tom S. took a step back, stepping on one of the symbols which responded by sending an electric shock through his body. He screamed in pain, falling to his knees, clearly marked by the evil power they had awakened. Ines, tears in her eyes, shouted desperately, "We need to get out of here now. We're going to die if we stay." As they tried to retreat, the hooded figures advanced, their skeletal hands reaching out, revealing sharp claws. The weight of imminent death hung in the air, almost tangible. Each friend felt the desperation mount as C.L. Udia, still floating, began to recite something in an ancient, forbidden language, the tone sounding almost like a death chant. Suddenly, a burst of white light pierced the crypt, blinding everyone for a moment. When their vision returned, an imposing figure stood between them and the hooded figures, a human form, but with an overwhelming presence, emanating an aura of purity and power. Its cloak shone, illuminating the crypt with an almost celestial light. One of the hooded figures screamed in disgust, and the figure spoke, its voice echoing like thunder. "You have no power here. Not while I am present." The entity extended a hand, and the invisible barrier around C.L. Udia shattered into 1,000 invisible pieces. She fell to the ground, exhausted but alive. The entity then turned its gaze to the book, and with a wave of its hand, caused it to slam shut with a thunderous sound, dispelling the surrounding darkness. The hooded figures attempted to attack, but were instantly repelled, their forms collapsing under the powerful light the entity emanated. Each specter that touched the light vanished with an agonizing scream until none remained. The ground stopped trembling, and the cracks began to close. The chamber lost its evil red glow, returning to a serene and normal darkness. The air, though still heavy, was now free of the malevolence that had previously saturated it. The figure turned to the group, its expression stern but relieved. "You have awakened something that should never have been disturbed. Return to where you belong and never venture down these paths again." With those words, the figure began to fade, diminishing in brightness, until it became just a faint echo of light in the air. The friends, trembling and relieved, helped C.L. Udia to her feet, and with caution, began to retreat from the crypt. The cold wind outside now felt like a warm embrace compared to what they had faced within those ancient walls. They found their way back, promising never to speak of that night again. And so, with hearts still racing and souls marked by the experience, they left the old cemetery behind, knowing they had survived something that could have destroyed them, but also left them forever changed. As the friends walked away from the crypt and the terrifying memories it held, they realized the night seemed colder and quieter than before. The wind blew gently, but with it came an almost inaudible whisper, as if the cemetery itself was lamenting the old stories. Tom S., still trembling, looked at his friends. "Never again," he murmured. "We're never coming back here." Everyone nodded silently, sharing an implicit understanding of what they had faced. However, the sense of relief quickly turned into a persistent anxiety. The feeling of being followed would not leave them. Ines suddenly stopped, her eyes darting around nervously. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice heavy with fear. The others stopped, holding their breath, and listened intently. Initially, it seemed like the wind rustling the trees, but it soon transformed into a more distinct sound, a distant crying. Rodrigo, trying to appear brave, but clearly shaken, looked around. "We should ignore it and keep moving. This place has given us more than enough tonight." C.L. Udia agreed, but something about her seemed different. After what happened in the crypt, a shadow seemed to have embraced her spirit, making her more reserved, almost introspective. Suddenly, the crying turned into a chilling, childlike laughter. Each of them felt a shiver run down their spine. It was the same laughter that had echoed during the reading of the book in the crypt. They were being followed by the past they tried to leave behind. The laughter seemed to echo from all sides, blending with the winds that blew the dry leaves across the ground. Desperate, they began to run, ignoring the path and trying to get away as quickly as possible. After running for what felt like hours, but was only a few minutes, they finally reached the cemetery gates, feeling relieved as the shadows behind them stopped following. In the faint light of the dawn beginning to trace the horizon, they had reached the relative safety of the world outside those gates. Ines, still frightened, whispered, "Will it ever leave us alone?" CL Udia looked towards the horizon and took a deep breath. "I don't know," she replied, more to herself than to the others. "But one thing is certain. We are not the same as before, and we need to find a way to deal with this." In the days that followed, the friends tried to return to their daily routines, but found it difficult. Each of them suffered from their own nightmares, disturbing flashbacks, and a persistent feeling of being watched. Something had come out of the crypt with them and refused to leave. Rodrigo began investigating the history of the cemetery and the crypt, searching for answers or ways to protect themselves. Tom S. visited a local medium, hoping for some insight that might ease their worries. Ines, constantly on edge, started recording her dreams and visions, trying to find some pattern that could help understand what was haunting them. And CL Udia, who had been marked more deeply by the event, delved into occult studies, determined to find a solution to rid them of the evil that pursued them. But with each discovery, a new mystery emerged. It was as if the evil was not only entrenched in the crypt, but in their very souls, becoming more a part of them than they could ever imagine. What began as a Halloween adventure had turned into something much darker and more persistent. The struggle was just beginning, and the friends needed to find a way to free themselves from the shadow that haunted them or risk being lost forever to the darkness they had unleashed. Winter approached, bringing longer, colder nights, increasing the sense of despair and vulnerability among the friends. CL Udia could no longer sleep, her nights flooded with terrifying visions of ancient monstrosities and macabre rituals. Yet, she had become the most determined to find a solution. One sleepless night in one of those sleepless nights, CL Udia found an ancient grimoire in the municipal library, hidden among common books. It was a forbidden text containing rituals and spells that promised to protect and possibly exorcise the evil spirits that had haunted them from that cursed place. She quickly shared the discovery with her friends. "We need to perform one of these rituals," she said firmly, holding the book with trembling hands. "It's our only chance to free ourselves." Tom S., still haunted by the shocks he felt in the crypt, hesitated. What if we only make things worse? Rodrigo, after his research, knew that the entities they awakened wouldn't leave them alone easily. "I agree with CL Udia. Whatever we have to do, we need to do it together. We can't run anymore." Ines, though terrified by the idea of further meddling with forces beyond her comprehension, nodded. "I'm in. Doing nothing is consuming us." They decided to meet at CL Udia's house the next night, preparing with the protection rituals described in the grimoire. The atmosphere was heavy, everyone feeling the invisible gaze of the hooded figures, as if they somehow knew what they were planning. When night fell, they lit candles in a circle, drawing protection symbols on the floor. CL Udia began to recite the words from the grimoire in an ancient language, each syllable carrying dramatic weight. They all held hands, forming a chain of energy that pulsed between them. As CL Udia continued the chant, the candles began to blaze intensely. The air was thick and charged, almost electric. The ground seemed to vibrate beneath them, signs that something was about to change. Suddenly, the shadows in the room seemed to take on a life of their own, stretching and moving as if they had a will. The circle of candlelight was now their only protection against the growing chaos outside. The hooded figures, now visible in the shadows beyond the circle, began to murmur indistinguishable threats, laden with malice. The light flickered, almost being sucked in by those specters. CL Udia seemed exhausted, but didn't stop. She was determined to finish the ritual. "Please work," she pleaded aloud. The air exploded with a deafening roar, throwing them to the ground. The darkness seemed stronger than ever, but then something changed. The light emitted by the candles became more intense, bathing the room in a purifying glow. The hooded entities retreated, their forms gradually fading until they disappeared completely. The ground stopped trembling, and the air softened, as if a great weight had been lifted. When it was over, they lay on the floor, panting but alive. They felt peace fill the space around them for the first time since the terrible night in the crypt. "I think we did it," whispered Rodrigo, visible relief in his voice. C.L. Udia, exhausted but determined, sighed heavily. "I'm not sure if we're completely free, but this has bought us some time. We need to be responsible for our actions from now on." The friends hugged, feeling a mix of relief and the awareness that, although the worst had passed, the memory of that night would linger. They knew they would face challenges again, but now with a new understanding and strength gained from surviving the darkness. In the weeks that followed, the friends tried to resume their normal lives, but it wasn't easy. The traumatic events had left deep marks on their psyches. However, the constant feeling of being pursued had finally dissipated. C.L. Udia dedicated herself even more to occult studies, now with a more positive intention, to learn how to protect and heal those around her. She began to notice small fragments of ancient wisdom surfacing in her dreams, as if the events had unlocked something in her mind. Rodrigo, driven by the experience, decided to become a paranormal investigator, documenting every detail of their adventures and research from the past months. He wanted to ensure no one else made the same mistakes they did. Ines focused on therapy, trying to understand and overcome her fears. She used her experience to help others going through trauma, channeling her energy into constructive and beneficial activities for the community. Tom S., initially more reluctant, found purpose in meditation and the study of spiritual traditions. He wanted to ensure he was always at peace with himself and prepared to protect those he loved. One evening, as they gathered again at C.L. Udia's house, something unusual happened. She had prepared a special herbal tea for everyone, a mix of relaxation and protection. As they talked and laughed, something in front of them glowed faintly. It was the grimoire. The pages began to turn on their own, stopping at a section that was previously blank. Now they were filled with new writing and symbols, seeming to reflect the friends' experiences, as if the book was documenting their journeys and progress. Curious, they approached. "The book is changing," said C.L. Udia, astonished. "It seems to be capturing our story." The new inscriptions spoke of protection, unity, and resilience, almost as if the grimoire itself was learning and evolving with them. In one of the chapters, a phrase stood out: "True strength lies in unity and learning." Rodrigo laughed, relieved. "I think our nightmare turned into a lesson." Tom S. agreed, "And now, we have a sort of guide to continue our lives more wisely." The friends realized that, although they had been marked by darkness, they had also emerged stronger and more united. What was once considered a book of curses and terror was now transforming into an artifact of wisdom and healing, reflecting their growth. C.L. Udia closed the grimoire with reverence. "We'll keep this safe. And always remember, true power comes from our unity and understanding." As winter finally gave way to spring, the friends began to see the light of a new day more clearly, knowing that together they could face any challenge. The memories still haunted them at times, but now they were more like shadows than tangible horrors. And whenever they needed comfort and guidance, they knew where to find it in each other, and in the grimoire that once terrified them, but was now a symbol of their courage and growth. The night ended with laughter and shared stories at the table. They had faced the darkness, and in a way they never imagined had won.